Behavioral Health Today, a podcast by Triad Behavioral Health covering trending topics in behavioral and mental health. This podcast is designed to share unique and relevant topics occurring within the world and our communities and bring them a mental health perspective.
Welcome to Behavioral Health Today. I'm your host, Dr. Graham Taylor, and I'm excited both for our show today and our guest. We've got Dr. Kristen Wilkenson with us again, and I'm so happy to have her with us. I so enjoy our times together. Today, we're going to be talking about family relationships during the holidays. But before we jump in, let me tell you a little bit about Kristen's professional background and her involvements. She is a licensed clinical psychologist at the Barrington Center for Counseling and Psychotherapy and is a remote EPPP licensure preparation coach with Triad Behavioral Health. She's also a contributing writer for Stepmom magazine and an adjunct professor at Elmhurst College and at Midwestern University. She's also in the process of writing a book, which we'll talk with her just briefly about near the end of our show today. I want to get caught up on that. Kristen specializes in working with young adults, women, divorced, step families, bariatric surgery candidates as well. She has extensive training in working with anxiety, depression, body image, perfectionism, grief and loss, adjustment, and relationships and family concerns. I'm so glad she's got that last emphasis right there, relationships and family concerns, because that ties in to our talk today. Kristen, welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me back. I always have so much fun.
We're talking about family relationships during the holidays. So family relationships, families, holidays, what could possibly go wrong? What's the possibility of what could go wrong here? So there's no stress during this time of year, right? When COVID on top of that, it's a piece of cake. I think there's always holidays and families, I think, pose some challenges. As we get started, help our folks understand when we're talking about relational stress, what it is, because it can look like so many various things with various families and couples. Share with us how you understand relational conflict and give us a picture, maybe some examples of what you've seen and worked with in terms of relational stress and relational conflict.
Yes, that is a good place to start. And when you ask what could go wrong, nothing. It's going to be great. Right. Everything can go wrong. So yes, definitely a great topic to be talking about this time of year. When I look at relational conflict between family members in particular, I think about where two or more people are clashing, possibly because of differing personality styles or some type of negative interaction through communication or behavior. And we tend to see that it'll evoke a negative emotion in somebody. So like anger, frustration, and or sadness. And I think when we look at, what does that even look like? I think a typical example in a couple's sense of what I see, perhaps personally and professionally, is that with differing styles. So if one person is super organized, right? They live in a very organized, planned existence, and then they maybe live with somebody or they're in a close relationship with another person who lives in what we call organized chaos, right, and disarray. These two people could possibly be experiencing some relational conflict because they have different styles and priorities. I have a couple of specific examples that I've seen more recently.
Love to hear it.
Personally, I think about, for me, and I've seen this with a lot of couples I work with, is that, you might want to work on a house project, right? It's really important to you. You're really excited about it. You're like, yes, let's start working on it. Let's get down and dirty on this project. And your spouse or your partner might be like, whoa, wait a minute. Let's pause. Let's process this project. Let's slow this down. Let's do some more research. Let's get it right the first time. And you're like, but I'm so excited. Let's go. I think the idea is that, we might do things differently, but it is important to remember, look, we do share in the same goal here, right? We want to get the project done and we want to do it well. And that we value the same things whenever we're in a conflict with someone we're close to. So whether it be a family member or a partner, it's taking that step back and thinking, okay, what's the goal here? Do we value the same thing? Are we on the same page and we're just getting to it in a different way? And I think that can help kind of bring down the emotional reaction, especially that kind of frustration, that anger, that, gosh, but why don't you want to do it right now? This is important to me. Do you not value what I value? And it's like, No, that's not the case at all. It could just be a matter of, we just do things a little bit differently, but we really care about the same things.
I like that. You're talking about bringing things ideally to kind of a conversational level. You're talking about for the holidays, everybody has their own picture, don't they? And what they would like it to be like. We want to have a good holiday season. And what do we both see going into it? But how to approach it? I oftentimes think in communication of the Oreo cookie, where there's a crust, there's a cream filling, there's a crust again. The idea that the top layer of the crust on the Oreo cookie, that's something positive. And the cream filling is the issue we're going to talk about. And then the crust on the bottom is something where we kind of wind it down with something positive as well. So it might be something like, hey, the holidays are coming up, and I know we both want to have a great time. And that's the part you're saying that we share. But I also know cream filling now. I also know that we probably have different expectations, maybe different wishes or different ideas. And what if we start sharing what these could be? And then the crust at the very end is, and I trust we can work through this and have a really great holiday plan when we're done with this talk. So I love this idea of being reminded that we each share the same goal, just maybe a different way of getting there.
Yes. And so I think all of our listeners can now envision Oreos when they're having
right.
having these discussions with their partners or their family members.
I got to get a Christmas cookie for the holiday scenario here. In thinking about prevention as we go into the holidays, maybe it's possible that we can preempt some of the normal and expected stress, like you're suggesting here, by developing, a healthy mindset and maybe even some realistic expectations. And I think really what we're talking about is identifying what we can control and how to acknowledge those things that are kind of outside of our control. Share with us some thoughts about this concept of control and our conversations in our planning as we go into the holiday time.
I think this is a great question for just the holiday time and life in general, but
right.
Definitely during these more stressful times like the holidays. But, when I think about right mindset, so it's like, okay, well, what's the right mindset going into this stressful period? I think about how people tend to get stuck. They get stuck in their thought patterns in particular. This thought of, oh, you know what, if I communicate this way, or if I behave in this way, that I'm going to be able to change the person, whoever the other party is. I'm going to change that because you know what, I'm going to act the right way. I'm going to say the right things. And that tends to set us up for failure, quite honestly, because there are so many aspects that go into a person feeling ready for change. And for those of us in the psychology field, I mean, just think about the stages of change by, Prochaska and DiClemente, right? On the EPPP. Right. And, we can't change other people just by our actions. There's so many things that go into play in terms of motivation and readiness for change. And so I think, when we find ourselves in conflict with other people, especially family, it's important to take that step back, take a pause, take a breath, and recognize, look, I can't change this person, but I do have some control here. I have control over my own emotional safety and awareness around my own reactions.
I really like that. I think that's, encouraging one's responsibility, kind of doing the within work before we do the between work. What you're also suggesting kind of triggers my thought would be, if I'm going to change something or we're going to work something out, there's always two levels of communication going on, aren't there? There's always the content and then there's the process. The content's the stuff, when do we put the lights up and how's it going to go this year? Who we're going to invite over? That's all important. But the process is really what's going on at a deeper level within myself and then between us as we talk about this. And what you're encouraging here is, how might we be flexible and kind of malleable as we work towards kind of a shared goal and plans that we're both comfortable with? And I know in terms of change, a lot of times we're trying to convince each other of the goodness of our plan or the rightness of our plan. So we're going after being right, versus the things that usually change us or we're willing to make changes around is when I know what something means to you. If I know that you're wanting to put this up in this way or have that kind of little ritual in place because back in the day, this is what your family did and what that meant. And you tell me the story, boy, I soften right away. And even if I don't necessarily agree or like that, what I do know is that it's meaningful to you. And because you're meaningful to me, that thing becomes meaningful to me. And I'm willing to accommodate it in ways that maybe I wouldn't have even thought about had I just thought, well, that's not a ritual that's going to fit into my picture. So I like this
Yes.
idea of the change, maybe including some awareness of, if I'm talking about something important, can you give me the backstory? It's almost like the headline, and then tell me the story underneath it and what that means to you.
I love that. I feel like you just gave such a beautiful example of empathy building. I mean, truly, that if we can understand where that person is coming from, why it is eliciting this emotional response, right? You know, in couples, this is, I guess, less of a holiday example and more of just a everyday example. But, you know, for especially heterosexual couples, right? It's like, gosh, you know, saying to the male spouse, like, why do you leave the toilet seat up? Like, that annoys me so much. Like, I hate that you do that. And, you know, the anger, the frustration, it's like, whoa, you know, the partner might be like, wait, why are you getting so upset? Like, I'm sorry, it was an accident. But maybe, you know, explaining a little bit more of, you know, hey, I feel like I'm being devalued or disrespected when you do this. And that's the reaction that I'm having. Not that I think you're being malicious, right? There's a difference between intention and perception. And so I love that example you gave.
Well, I like what you're saying right there too, because when you start talking kind of from your heart, I can't get defensive around that. There's nothing really that you're attacking me on. You're not telling me that my action is wrong, or if I was more thoughtful, I would. There's nothing for me to defend or explain. When you just say, you know what, it just means a lot to me if you would consider this. I got to pause and I got to say, well, if I care about you and I love you, I want to consider that in a way that's meaningful to you. And I want you to feel that from me. So yeah, I love what you're talking about in this. Let's take this and kind of segue into maybe some practical things. Let's give our listeners some tangible takeaways that they can think about and incorporate into their holiday plans, maybe even something around some boundaries that might get brought into this whole discussion with people as we talk with each other.
Oh, absolutely. And I talk with my patients about this all the time. So this is a fun topic, and it's so important and so applicable to our everyday lives, especially around the stress around holidays and bringing family members together that aren't normally together often. It was interesting, just this week, I saw a fellow psychology professional in the field about, I think our society gets confused with the word balance and boundaries. And so I kind of like to start off by saying, let's be aware that we're not striving for balance, because balance implies that it's equal on both sides. So you're still trying to do everything. And that's not really setting yourself up for success, still trying to balance everything. So I like to use the word boundaries, because when we think about boundaries, it's, okay, I'm focusing on what is important to me. How is this going to be protective for me? And then I can be able to be more present in these, you know, interactions or these moments. So keeping that in mind.
I really like that. Do you find that there are different types of boundaries in terms of as you're talking with folks?
Absolutely. So in particular, there's, you know, lots of different research that looks at different types of boundaries, but I wanted to boil it down for today because, you know, this isn't like a 3-hour, you know, podcast. So we'll keep it brief, nice little takeaways. So I'll be talking about the 6 most common. And this was discussed recently by licensed marriage and family therapist, Elizabeth Earnshaw. So I want to give credit where it's due. Yeah. And so she talks about these 6 kind of commonly discussed boundaries. And then I'll provide some holiday examples that we can apply these to our lives. Okay. The first one being physical boundaries. So first and foremost, physical boundaries, and kind of self-explanatory, but in this year, particularly holiday, thinking about the pandemic, right? So if you have, let's say, some type of pre-existing condition, or you're in a higher risk population and your family is really pressuring you to get together in person and you're just not feeling comfortable with that, you can set up a physical boundary. And the way that could look is, you know, look, I have asthma and I want to take extra safety precautions this year due to COVID. So I'm happy to participate, but I'll FaceTime or Zoom on Christmas this year.
Got it. Yeah, that physical boundary, I think probably more so than any time we've had holiday get-togethers, it's how we're going to get together within the context of what we're in, and also one's personal safety and maybe some concerns that, and I think when we talk about that personal boundary piece, and particularly with space, people are going to be pretty understanding particularly with those that are at risk. Give us another one.
Emotional boundaries.
Emotional.
Perhaps my favorite one to talk about.
Okay.
We talk about this a lot in therapy, but they're all important, but this one comes up a lot. So I think when we see families coming together, it might start to trigger some old emotions, some sensitivities, some vulnerabilities. So let's say, you're a young adult, or, you're kind of just moved out of the house and you haven't seen your parents in a while, and you come back in for the holidays, and mom really wants to talk about, so when are you getting married? When are you having babies? And so thinking, okay, you know what? Saying something along the lines of, look, I really can't talk about that right now. It's not the right time. And that doesn't mean you'll never talk about it ever again, but it's setting this boundary that, look, this is a holiday. This is meant to be a time of joy and connectedness. And that topic tends to put me in a more vulnerable, more challenging emotional space that I don't want to be in today.
That's really good. I'm thinking about the struggle in setting boundaries at some point. Maybe we can talk about that in just a minute after we get these boundaries you're talking about, these 6 that seem applicable to the holidays. But I know that sometimes there's a way that we can set boundaries that can be helpful. Let's flag that. We'll come back to that piece. Give us another boundary related to the holidays that we can give our listeners.
So the next one is time boundaries. And ironically enough, this came up in my own household last night, and I was I was laughing. I'm like, wow, I'm going to talk about that in the podcast tomorrow.
Nothing like a personal story. Right.
So time boundaries. So let's say, you have a partner, or you come from divorced or separated families, and you have multiple families to visit around the holidays, which, in previous shows that I've done with you, I've shared very openly that I'm a part of, a step family. I have divorced parents, and so does my partner. So we're used to having many, many homes that we have to go to around the holiday season. And so thinking about these time boundaries, you can think about setting some limits around your visitations. And, COVID plays into that this year, but just even in a traditional sense, instead of maybe trying to visit 6 homes in one day, maybe break it up with your family and say, look, I'm going to visit mom on the Sunday before Christmas. I'm going to visit dad Christmas Eve. And then we're going to visit your family on Christmas Day. So we're only doing maybe 1 or 2 houses a day versus all 6 in one day. Yeah.
Yeah. Really good. Really good. Give us number 4.
Yes. So number 4, I won't say a ton about it. It can be holiday applicable, maybe not, but we'll just mention it because it is a common one that can come up, particularly with couples. That's sexual boundaries. So, being open in terms of your communication with your partner about any type of, emotional or physical needs. So that's kind of, I think, a little bit more self-explanatory.
How about number 5 and 6?
Yes. So number 5 is really key this year in particular. Intellectual boundaries. Oh. So this is an election year. Families.
No stress?
No stress at all. Yeah. Families tend to come together, and we find that some folks have different political beliefs. And so being aware of, look, we have different beliefs, but saying something when the conversation starts getting heated, putting a boundary up intellectually and saying something like, I can respect that we have differing opinions on this. Right. And I'm not going to try to convince you otherwise. I think we just see this differently.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I also think that, sometimes we get so focused on a candidate or a party, but what do we all share in common? That, and how might we, even if in our differences, how might we come to some, centric places here that could really be something that we all share, whether it's, national sovereignty, healing our nation, or whatever it may be. So I like that. Number 6, wind us down on this one.
Material boundaries.
Boundaries.
Think of like material goods. So for example, I see this commonly happen in some of my sessions when, siblings are together again. So maybe there's like the older sibling and there's some younger siblings, and let's say your younger sister says, hey, do you mind if I borrow your car? And, you're kind of all back at your parents' house. Yeah. And, you may not be comfortable with that, for various reasons. So maybe saying something like, look, I can't lend out my car. I'm the only person on the insurance, and I really am just not in a place where I want to take that financial risk.
Right.
And I think by saying that, it helps to understand, look, this isn't personal. This isn't an attack on you that I don't trust you. It's more about, look, I don't feel comfortable letting anybody borrow my car for these various kind of logistical, legal reasons. And,
Really good.
hopefully that person won't personify it too much.
I think along the way here, you're giving us some tips on how to set boundaries and how to craft the language. I think, again, I'm going to go back to Oreo cookie. I need to get a Christmas cookie for this one that has kind of layers. But the idea being, what you're saying there is, can I borrow your car? Let's for fun plug it into the Oreo cookie, because if people can have planned responses ahead of time, they can manage those times with a lot less stress as they set a boundary that's hard. People have a hard time setting boundaries. If I'm setting a boundary, I'm having to voice my feelings and my needs. There are no two more difficult things for us to do. There's so many communication strategies. I use the nonviolent communication strategies, Rosenberg's NVC. It's a wonderful strategy to use. You can YouTube it. It's phenomenal. And we use it with couples that I do my work with. But I also say, if you can just focus on two things, FN, feelings, needs, feeling, needs. In fact, it's so important. They put it as the bottom left key on your keyboard, FN, to remind you all the time of focusing on two things, your feelings and your needs. If I can start there, probably 90% of my communication with you can likely go okay. Because if I come in with a feeling and a need, you're not going to attack me. You're not going to tell me it's stupid. You're not going to try and tell me yours is better. You're going to say, oh, okay, that I can get my arms around that feeling and need. I don't know what we're going to do about it, but let me tell you my feelings and needs. So if I can just start with feelings and needs sometimes, but also when you're talking about something like the car, we can even weave in here the Oreo cookie. We could say, hey, you know what? Positive. I would love to help you around your transportation needs here. Bear with my words. Middle cream filling is, but I'm on the only one on the insurance and I can't lend it out, but I'd love, here's the crust again. I'd love to find a way maybe to help you get that need met. And any other thoughts we could talk about how to get from here to there? So it equips us to have a difficult conversation, because our fear is, if I put up a boundary, you're going to be upset with me. You're going to be angry with me. It's going to create some felt or some real conflict that's going to be difficult. Any thoughts you have around some additional tips on boundaries that can help facilitate those conversations that are not always easy?
I love that you're bringing awareness to that, because whenever I talk about boundaries, particularly for folks who are implementing them for either the first time or they're very new to boundaries, I always like to set the expectation that, look, if you're new to this, be prepared that especially when it comes to your family, you might get pushback. That's totally normal. You're going against the traditional grain of the family system, especially if you come from what we call an enmeshed family where there are no boundaries.
Absolutely.
You are going to be targeted because, you're the only one trying to set these boundaries, but that's not the norm of the family. And so I always think of this quote from Berné Brown that is so powerful. And I feel like it comes up in session every day, truly. It's clear is kind. Clear is kind. Yeah. I almost want everybody to put it on a pillow or something, or like a Post-it note that they see every day, because we're so fearful that we're going to hurt somebody's feelings, or it's just going to, go so badly. And it's like, at the end of the day, clear is kind. And I think that really speaks to what you were talking about earlier.
I love that. I love Berné Brown, just to start out with. It'd be great to have, her on the show one time too, and just ping off of the things she talks about. She, talks about shame. She talks about communication, expectations, all the things you're kind of highlighting here for us today. Clear is kind. And the clearer we can be, the kinder we're going to be to ourselves and also to the relationship, I think, in some helpful ways. But being clear has that risk to it, like you're saying, and that's not always easy. But if we can, we can even say something like, hey, we're going to have this holiday and I don't know how we're going to make this work, but here's kind of what's important to me this year. Can I just toss it out? Or actually, can you tell me what's important to you this year as we come into the holiday season? Why don't you go first? And I'll listen, and I'll try and listen as best I can. And as I listen, I might give you some thoughts about it, making sure I'm getting this right and to understand what's most important to you and what you'd like to have as some takeaway memories from this holiday season coming up. And then when you're done, can I maybe share what I'm thinking? And again, that keyboard key FN, what I'm feeling and needing as we come into this holiday, what do you think? So I think that's pretty good. I'm also thinking too, that sometimes boundaries can be a wee bit challenging. I'm working with a couple where in preparation for the holiday, the husband kind of has a lot of his stuff in the house right now, kind of just spread all over, kind of how men tend to kind of migrate and kind of get in a lot of spaces. And she's saying, I need to have this clear for the family coming over. And he's like, I'll do it. I'll do it. So this is 3 weeks ago. We were meeting on a every other week basis. And we said, hey, as of this date, can you have it all cleared up? And she said, I will not say one more word about it. I promise. This is my agreement. I will not say one more word about the need to clean this up. But can I tell you how important it is? I love the house to be pretty. I love to get it decorated before folks come over. And I just love to have a nice presentation as a family comes. And he said, okay, I got it. We got to that date in the therapy sessions about a week and a half out before the holiday, 2 weeks before the holidays. And he hadn't done anything. So we had to kind of up the ante just a wee bit there because the holidays were coming up. It was important to her. And he just kind of, I think, procrastinated. I think there's some other things going on, but it was necessary to kind of push a boundary. And the boundary became, we're going to set a new one. If you don't get it done by Wednesday, which we're going to give you total permission to do, he said, okay. But if it's not done by Wednesday at 3, she's going to bring the kids over. They're going to box everything up and they're going to put all of your stuff in the garage. And it seems a little kind of hard, but at some point, if you don't listen to the importance of the other person's needs, and we're giving you all kinds of space and non-reminders, I don't want to be a nag kind of thing, to fill that space with you being willing to do your part in an agreed upon way, and you don't do it, then we have to have another talk. There's another content, now it's process. The process is, I'm not feeling respected. So I'm going to need to ask that by Wednesday at 3, if it's not done, I'm bringing the kids over, we're boxing it up into the garage it goes. We'll make it nice, but it's going to go in there.
Right. And
clear is kind. And that's where this is originating. Clear is kind. That's exactly it. And at some point, people need to recognize that I need to respect you in the relationship that I'm in with you. I need to really listen to this. I can't keep kicking the can down the road or, being caught up in my own needs and maybe being a little passive aggressive. Cannot do that. So I like this idea of clear is kind, and sometimes it requires actions that up the ante. So
definitely. I think also to add to that point is if we don't address and maybe reset a boundary or set a new boundary or follow up in our communication, it's going to build resentment. And
that's it.
That is a lot bigger of a challenge, I think, than the initial issue, which is, hey, can you clean up before we have family over? It's important to me.
I think that's really true. I think that self-respect and that we teach people how to treat us. We teach people what to expect of us. And in enmeshed families, we're expected not to have any boundaries and any personal needs, like you were saying. So this idea that we can actually teach people what we need and relationally we can be healthier and better. But sometimes it requires crafting some words, maybe an Oreo cookie along the way that helps us kind of put some things out there that are important, and healthiness comes with the clarity. So really good. Hey, I know we're kind of winding down on our time today. As we do so, any resources, recommendations you have for people to follow up with from our show today?
Absolutely. And I was just going to follow up with, I know you were saying you were hoping for a holiday cookie. Maybe we can envision like the Oreos that, don't they have the ones where they're like kind of quote unquote Christmas colors?
Oh, with the red cream filling. That's it right there. We're going to the holiday Oreo. Very good.
Had to add that. But yes, onto resources.
Okay.
I think always a good place, a safe place for folks to start is the internet. But I always say, look, be careful about your credible sites. One site that I really like is the Psychology Today. They have some really great articles. Cool. They vet all of their authors. They're experts in our field, and they really are very good, credible articles. Sometimes you might find, look, I'm needing a little bit more individualized support for what I'm going through. There's lots of layers, I need to speak with somebody. So you could look at possibly, some individual therapy, which you can find a therapist through either your health insurance, or you can kind of, Google for different therapists with your zip code, things like that. But I also like to add to the mix too, that sometimes, especially right now, these are so accessible with COVID, everything's kind of turning online, that there are a lot of support groups, even, in person, quote unquote, through Zoom, these support groups, and they can kind of be met to customize your needs. So let's say, for example, you come from a divorced family and you want to join a group about, stepkids, or, my parents are a divorced group, and being able to talk at this time of year about, look, I'm having a lot of holiday stress. I've got a lot of people to visit. My parents, they don't get along. And I always think of that movie Four Christmases with Vince Vaughn and Reese Witherspoon, which I like to think is my life sometimes. In some ways, lots of places to visit, wishing you could just go to the Caribbean instead. But that's a story for another day. But definitely thinking about how that individualized support with people who are literally going through the same thing as you can feel so validating and normalizing.
Yeah, I love that idea of being able to use the resources you mentioned, but also a support group or therapy. If you can take something on, set yourself up for success from the beginning. As we're talking about the holiday season, let's set ourselves up for success. Let's have a good plan in place. So there's clarity, and I think we can really script how things can really go. We can be, in a shared way, controlling the things that are important to us, and kind of ideally reach kind of a shared place that we have some really nice takeaways from the holiday time. Hey, just before we close, I would love to have an update on your book. Let me circle back to that. How's that coming?
Oh, thank you so much for checking back in. It was a really fun show to do, talking about the book, The Daughters of Divorce. And
yes,
definitely still collecting stories. So I did get some interest, which was great. I mean, some really good stories are coming in, but I still need more. So please, folks, don't think that I've gotten everything I need. If you're still interested and you thought, oh gosh, that was, a few months ago, she probably doesn't need any more. I totally do. So please feel free. If you're interested, you're a daughter of divorce, you want to get more information, or you want to contact me to share your story, you can visit me on my website. So it's www.kristenwilkenson.com, or you can email me at, all one word, thesleepereffectproject@gmail.com. And gosh, once it's done, I can't wait to share it with you all. It's so good so far.
I'll bet it is. We're going to put that information up on our website as well. So wonderful to kind of catch up on that. Congratulations on that coming together.
Thank you.
Kristen, it's always nice to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining us today. The tips on boundaries, how to come and talk about these things, expectations, things we can control. And I look forward to everybody having a wonderful holiday season. Merry Christmas to you and Happy New Year. We'll see you next year.
Thank you for having me, and happy holidays to all, and a healthy 2021.
Yes, it's going to be good. And to those listening in, we thank you so much for joining us. And we'll look forward to having you joining us next time on Behavioral Health Today.
We appreciate all the support from our community, and if you like our show, one of the best ways you can support it is by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review. Behavioral Health Today is a podcast part of the Tried Behavioral Health Network, all rights reserved.